I just want to cross over to Parliament where we have Michelle Ngele Odhiambo. I don't know if she'll appear here behind us but Michelle, good morning. And thank you for being there for us. Maybe you could tell us what is happening in Parliament. Is there much activity so far, and what should we expect?
Well, quite a bit of activity here at Parliament, Dan, the heart of Kenya's democracy, just a few hours from that national reading of the National Budget 2025-2026. And so we're standing right outside the Parliament. Preparations are ongoing ahead of Treasury CS Mbadi's arrival just before 3 p.m. this afternoon, when the budget will be read. We've already seen several members of Parliament making their way into Parliament ahead of that budget reading. We'll be speaking to some of them in the course of this live broadcast. But Dan, it's an important day as many Kenyans have their eye on Parliament today. A significant budget. It will be the first for Treasury CS Mbadi, but more notably, it will be the first budget under the broad-based government. And if you remember, the broad-based government itself was a culmination of months of public frustration and growing frustration over Kenya's economy and the high cost of living. The broad-based government then saw members of the opposition, Orange Democratic Movement Party, join key government positions, including Treasury, and Treasury CS Mbadi then taking that helm. Previously, he was a fierce critic of the Kenya Kwanza administration, criticizing, among others, their fiscal policies. And so many will be looking to see today, will the broad-based government deliver? Will John Mbadi's budget improve the cost of living? Will it create jobs for the millions of unemployed Kenyans across the country? But what will be different in this year's budget? That's the question Kenyans are asking. Now, the government is promising something called zero-based budgeting. And this is essentially, it means that every ministry now has to account for every single shilling that they would want allocated or they would want to spend for the current financial year, as opposed to what has been happening previously, where ministries and different government sectors would base their allocation based on the previous financial year's allocation. John Mbadi says zero-based budgeting, which means budgeting from scratch, from the very first shilling. We'll see more funds being left over away from the current expenditure to focus on issues that affect Kenyans more: healthcare, education, infrastructure as well. And so today, we expect the Treasury Cabinet Secretary just a few hours from now to present that 4.29 trillion shilling budget, the biggest budget in Kenya's history. And that's about a 10 to 11% increase from last year's 4 trillion shilling budget. But here's a catch, Dan. About 71% of this budget actually goes to recurrent expenditure. So that means salaries, operations, debt servicing as well. 71%. That's about 3.1 trillion shillings from the 4.2 trillion shillings. And so development spending, which drives things like infrastructure, health, social amenities, for example, is getting a paltry 18% of the budget. And that's about 805 billion shillings from the total 4.29 trillion shilling budget. And then we have debt servicing, which is likely to be one of the standing points or a core issue in this year's budget. And you'll be interested to learn that debt servicing alone is taking a whopping 1.37 trillion shillings from the entire budget. So then if you imagine a Kenyan household and, when they're doing the budgeting, a third of their budget goes to paying off debt. And then the other larger chunk now goes to everyday bills, rent, food. And so it is a balancing act that Kenyans are interested to hear, especially with the Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Mbadi saying that they've really tried to lessen the burden on Mwananchi, even with the Finance Bill of 2025, which has proposed several tax reforms. But the CS says that there's been no increases in tax in that budget. And so on the bright side, of course, we've seen several projected allocations, including allocations to the health sector, with that budget surging now by 73% to 204 billion shillings, reflecting the government's commitment to implementing universal health coverage. But of course, remember that comes in the backdrop of universal health coverage staff across the country protesting to, among other issues, payment on permanent and pensionable terms and promises that were made to them during the COVID-19 period when the talk on universal health coverage initially began. And so as we await that budget reading done, also one of the key issues we'll be waiting to see is the issue on pending bills. Over 500 billion shillings in pending bills there. The government waiting, Kenyans waiting for the government to address that among the many sticky issues in this year's budget done. Much more will come live here from Parliament. Let's take it back to you in studio.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for that. Quite the brief. You should actually be an analyst on set at this rate. Thank you for that, Michelle. We shall be crossing back to Michelle and the rest of the team at Parliament in the course of this broadcast as we keep getting the pulse of the nation in regards to this day, the budget, the economy, and while all the figures, not all the figures, but a lot of the figures that are being discussed here have been in the public domain, there still remain some concerns about the expectations of what CS Mbadi is going to be presenting before Parliament. Are we going to feel a bit more taxes, a bit more some regulations that may be a bit uncomfortable for some people?